So, okay, let's jump into what I just brought up then, and let's talk about birth control. So,
Hmm.
how does birth control change a woman?
So there's 17 different forms of birth control, first of all. So we're talking hormonal birth control, I imagine. And as I just went through the four phases of the cycle, you have this rise in estrogen, the rise in testosterone, the rise in progesterone, and then the drops. Right? Your cycle's moving in waves. And it's on a 28-day cycle. Whereas when you take hormonal birth control, you are just completely flatlined. There is no variation from one day to the next. When you're cycling naturally, you're getting a different hormonal message every single day, right? And your hormones are signaling for how you should show up, how you should respond, how you should behave, right? They're overseeing everything that you do. And when you're getting a different hormonal message from one day to the next, you're responding differently to your environment. Whereas when you're on hormonal birth control, what hormonal birth control is doing, particularly the pill, which is synthetic hormones, right? They're bioidentical, but they're actually a lot of progesterone. Synthetic progesterone is actually made from testosterone, which is interesting. Um, But you're not getting the same hormones that your body would be producing naturally, but they're still being received similarly. And when you're on hormonal birth control, what the pill does to you is it puts you in a state similar to your luteal phase. So the body thinks that I've already released the egg this month, right? We don't need to build up the estrogen. We don't need to mature that egg. We don't need to release that egg because it's already been released. So it just maintains high progesterone, low estrogen all the way through, right? So you do not have these peaks and valleys. You don't have this variation. You're living in a constant inner fall, right? You're just perpetually in your luteal phase when you're on
Mhm,
hormonal birth control.
mhm. And before anyone jumps in and says, well, I like being extremely consistent,
Hmm.
right? To me, like being someone who has like guided a lot of people through the microdosing space, and like when we're talking about antidepressants, we're creating a similar thing with those pharmaceuticals, where it's like we're removing the ability for emotions to flow and to change over time, which I would argue is like the heart pulses, right? It's like how you know you're alive. There's meant to be ups and downs. You're like, enjoy it, learn, enjoy, learn. That's how life becomes rich. And
Hmm.
like when we throw in antidepressants, you just flatlined. Everyone's just
Yeah.
fucking numb, And I would say it sounds like a very similar thing when it comes to birth control.
Yeah, they've actually Denmark did some really incredible and extensive studies on women because in Denmark they have basically these, what's it called when you have lists of things computerized? Like,
Like databases.
yeah, they have linked databases. So all their databases are connected
In their medical system.
in their medical system. So
Okay,
they're a
gotcha.
very
Yeah.
small, wealthy country. So all their databases and their medical records are all interconnected and they're linked. And so if you get a prescription for birth control, that is linked to, any other diagnosis that you get at any other time in your life. And so they started to do research in Denmark of what's the probability of women that get put on hormonal birth control, what's the probability of them being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And depending on the age range, it changes, but for the age ranges 16 to 21, it was a 50% increase. Your likelihood of being diagnosed with depression and anxiety goes up 50%. And it's for the same reason that you said, when you stop having these peaks and valleys, when you're getting the same hormonal message every day, You begin to flatline, right? You don't have this signaling that makes life exciting and that makes life feel like it's worth living. It also deregulates your cortisol levels. So you're not getting these cortisol spikes. And a lot of people think that cortisol is really bad, but having really low cortisol or muted cortisol is just as bad because cortisol is also just signaling to you, oh, there's something important going on, right? An attractive man walks into the room and your cortisol spikes, or
Mhm.
a hot woman walks into the room and your cortisol spikes because it's signaling that there's something important happening here. Pay attention.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when you're on hormonal birth control, you don't have that signaling of like, pay attention, this is important.
Okay. One thing that is hilarious that I mean, it's like also kind of sad, but it's also hilarious. Tell me about the stripper data.
Yeah, the stripper data. I can't remember the name of the researcher off the top of my head. I'm not really good with that kind of stuff. But it was a really good trial because in the trial, the strippers who were being studied didn't know that they were being studied. And the, what's it called? Someone that's getting stripped on? The
A participant? A
what am I gonna
patron?
patron? I think patron's the word. Patron's the word. The patron of the strip club also didn't know that they were being studied. It was a blind study. So no one knew that they were being looked at. And what this researcher did was that he got all the strippers to mark on a calendar when they came into work where they were at in their cycle. All right, when they clocked in for the day, they just had to mark where they were at. And then he would count up all the women's tips at the end of their shift, and he would cross-reference how much tips that they were making based on where they were at in their cycle. And what he found was that women that were in their follicular phase were making $30 to $50 an hour. I think it was $50 an hour. Women that were in their follicular phase, strippers that were in their follicular phase were making $50 an hour. Strippers that were ovulating were making $70 an hour. And strippers that were in their luteal phase were making $30 an hour. And that was just like the general consensus of all the strippers across the board. You would see this variation in how much they were making.
These were
What they
averages.
these
Mhm.
yeah, the averages. But across the board that's what they were finding, and the women that were on hormonal birth control were making $30 to $40 an hour with no variation, which completely adds up with the luteal phase, right?
Mhm.
They were making the same amount of money as the women that were in their luteal phase because that's what you're perpetually in. That's what hormonal birth control is doing to your system, is putting you in that place. And they've even done studies where, men will smell the t-shirts of women at different phases of their cycle, and they will always be more attracted to the smell of women that are fertile. Right? The smell of women in their follicular and ovulatory phases will elicit testosterone in men, which makes them think that they're more attractive. Like testosterone and estrogen really like each other, right? They're very attracted to each other and they balance each other out really well. And when you're on hormonal birth control, you have very low estrogen because you're in that luteal phase where progesterone is dominant. And what they find is that women that are on hormonal birth control are attracted to men with low testosterone. But if they come off the pill, they realize they're not attracted to their partner anymore because they have no testosterone. And when they're cycling naturally and they have natural estrogen moving through their body, they want that testosterone,
Mhm.
right? They want that masculine energy, that strong jaw, that symmetrical face. Those testosterone markers aren't being met. And there's some crazy studies out there about women that met their partners on hormonal birth control. They got married, they decided they want to have children, and then they went off hormonal birth control for the first time in 20 years and they realized they weren't attracted to their partner anymore and they got divorced. So divorce rates skyrocket when women go off hormonal birth control if they met their
Mhm.
partner on the pill.
Mhm, mhm. That's interesting. And then and then we have a massive population of women on birth control, which is like this massive chemical experiment. Like this is not something that's new. You know what like I'm sorry, this is not something that's ancient by any
Yeah.
means. Like this is what maybe 50 years of experimentation across the global
Mhm.
population. And there's this saying, and it's like good times make what is it? Good times make weak men make hard times make
Make good.
strong
Mm.
men make good times,
Mhm.
right? And it's almost like we have women getting on birth control and then it's making weak men, you know?
Mhm.
It's like castrating the nations.
Mhm. I think there's also a piece of like, women are in the workforce, right? And we're all operating on this 24-hour circadian rhythm. And a man's cycle aligns perfectly with the circadian rhythm. Your testosterone peaks in the morning along with your cortisol, and then it dips throughout the day, and you get sleepy and you go to bed. And then you do the whole
Andre Sol.
cycle. You do the whole cycle all over again, right? And the whole workforce is built on this cycle. And so as women enter the workforce, they feel like they can't compete with men because they're not operating on the same cycle, right? We can't show up the same every day because we're changing from one day to the next. And so there's something enticing for women that are in the workforce to be on hormonal birth control because it makes you even keel, right? You do not have these fluctuations, right? It
Right. Even though you're actually probably performing at like the lowest point, you know? It's even, but it's low.
It's even, but it's low, but there is some testosterone in there, so maybe it makes you a little bit more competitive in that sense. So you don't have all these fluctuations, you don't have all these, hormonal fluctuations that make you change from one day to the next, and you have a little bit more testosterone in your system, so you feel like you can compete with the boys a little bit more. You can show up.
Remember just like even seeing recently, just like scrolling on Instagram, this woman telling the story of like the time she took like the dose of a man's level of testosterone. And she was like, even I was looking around the office being like, I would bend her over.
And so she's so funny in the Temple of Her call the other day. I was like, Kate, ladies, there was like five ladies on the call. I was like, ladies, can we just have an appreciation for the fact that when we're ovulating, so when our testosterone as is at its highest, men have 30 times more than that at all times. And I was just like, guys, come on, can we just have a round of applause? And all the women are just like clapping for the men, being like, God, okay. Well, I have some, I feel for the men. When we're at peak ovulation, we're, incredibly vivacious and horny, and our libido is high, and we think about sex a lot. At least I do, and a lot of the women I was talking to do. And to think that men have 30 times more than that all the time is like, okay, we have some compassion for men. We can
Uh,
show some love. Show some love for the men and what they're dealing with on a day to day.
oh. Um, Thanks so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, don't forget to like and subscribe below. It really helps a growing channel like this out. And click up here, it'll take you to a collection of the best this podcast has to offer.